So I was just thinking about how it's kind of strange for me in that I obviously work where I'm channeling dragons and goddesses, which is a pretty out there, expansive thing to be talking about. Yet actually, more and more in my own life, like I don't really speak to them very much. Like I'm just kind of doing my own thing, and the emphasis in my ordinary life is just being an ordinary person. And something that I try to teach, and I try and put across in my videos and when I'm working with people, is just how to be an ordinary person while this stuff is going on, and not to get too overexcited about it. And I do get some people who are very excited, and I try and ground that.
Yeah.
I guess because like I've gone through that stage myself, you know, and got kind of used it as a form of escapism, like because ordinary life was too messy. And it's like, well, I can become this extraordinary person that's connected to these extraordinary beings. And that's like kind of a bit of an ego illusion.
Yeah.
And spending some time in that state and then eventually realizing that actually it's better to be in reality than in a kind of a bubble. So popping that bubble, like there's been a few people in my life who have popped that bubble for me, and initially it hurting, but then me feeling actually quite grateful to that person. So like I've kind of taken on the responsibility of being a bit of a bubble burster. But like, so one of the things that I hoped we could talk about today is like integrating our bigger experiences into just an ordinary life. And we were talking before we started recording about like time management, like, and how both of us kind of suck at time management, and we have to have lots of lists that we've created,
and lists of lists,
exactly. And then we lose the list. Like we're trying to keep track of everything in lists so we don't lose stuff, but then we lose the list. And that's something that I don't think that many people talk about with awakening, like how it creates these kinds of cognitive challenges, like because you're in a different state of consciousness, and the way our mind used to work, it doesn't function in quite the same way. And now it's harder to keep track of things, but you've got to find some way of keeping track of things. But not that many people speak about it. So it might be quite relieving for some people to hear this, because they might be going through this and think that there's something wrong with them, when actually this is a normal part of awakening. You know, you as I see it, you're kind of making your mind more present, so it's less able to kind of manipulate past and future. And then
less able to
with lists, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. The more you are in the present, the less you're able to really fixate on keeping details present in your mind, right? Because in order to, if somebody tells me I have to do something in 2 hours, I need to sort of fixate on that for the next 2 hours. I need to keep it sort of at the forefront of my mind for the next 2 hours. I need to keep sort of like hitting the button again and again to remind myself, oh yeah, and in an hour and a half, oh yeah, and in 25 minutes, oh yeah, and in 20 minutes, right? I have to keep having that thought loop there running in the background or in the foreground for the next 2 hours. But if I'm really living in the present, really sort of like in the present moment, it's difficult to do that. And so I'm going to forget. I mean, you could tell me to do something in 15 minutes and I might forget, you know, to do that because I'm just kind of lost in the present moment, right? And not really sort of, able to fixate like that on something. And so my solution really is just a whole lot of multiple levels of to-do lists and reminders, right? So if you told me right now I had to do something in 2 hours, I would set a 2 hour timer on my phone to go off or an hour and 55 minutes to go off. Actually, maybe an hour and 58 minutes because 5 minutes I might forget. So have it go off right before I'm supposed to do it, and when it goes off, then I will remember. Oh yeah, it's 2 o'clock. I'm supposed to do
Have,
blah blah blah.
have you ever seen the movie Memento?
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah. The movie
Kind of
about
like
this
that,
guy who loses his long-term memory,
yeah.
and like he only has short-term memory, so he ends up like he tattoos his body with little messages to remind himself of like what's
I
happening.
I would literally run out of space in a week if I started tattooing my body with this, but
Yeah.
yeah, but it's no joke. I have an iPhone, so I have a calendar app, I have the reminders app, I have the notes app. And depending on if it's short term, medium term, or long term things to do, it's going in one of those places, or it does, and I have to put it there in the moment, right? If we're talking about, oh, let's do something next Saturday, like
Yeah.
it's on the calendar in that moment, or else it will never happen. Because yeah, even something I'm really excited about, I'm not gonna um be able to fixate on it to the point of remembering it necessarily. So really good chance it'll slip through the cracks if I don't get it onto one of those into one of those places. And then yeah, and then I have a sort of a routine where in the morning I'll look at the calendar. I look at the reminders that are due today. I sort of like block out time in my calendar to go through to-do lists, to make sure that I'm sort of doing that on a regular basis, and just keeping track of what I have to do during the day.
Mm.
And it works. I mean, it's not. I actually think I would say, the awakening can lead to a lot more bandwidth and productivity and energy to get stuff done. If what you're doing is really in good alignment with the awakening, right? Like I know lots of people who have had an awakening process and they realize, oh, I need to quit my job and go and do something else because I'm not, this isn't in alignment with the awakening process. But if your work is in alignment, I feel like awakening can kind of clean up a lot of the um a lot of the kind of muck that mucks up your clarity about stuff. And so
The
there might be
overthinking.
overthinking, or like ego serving instead of doing something cleanly. You've got some kind of like alternative agenda, some kind of ego wrapped up in it or something like that. But the more that kind of stuff falls away, the more your relationships can be really like easy and clear. Work relationships, then just the more efficient things get, and the more bandwidth there is to be able to devote to work if it's in alignment. So I don't think awakening is like
Like
automatically incapacitating, which a lot of people assume it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I think it's good for us to talk about is because quite a few people have these maybe like quite big expectations about what awakening will bring. And by kind of grounding it into ordinary life and mentioning the not so flashy aspects of it, I think it helps to kind of humble us and accept our humanity.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Situation. Like,
yeah. So
it's not too flashy and cool to be forgetting stuff all the time.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yes, I've been humbled many times with with forgetting to show up somewhere when I really meant to. But yeah. So by the time we're releasing this recording, my book will be published. So it's called Awakening the Below by Oholomo. And that book presents kind of a model. I think we've kind of alluded to it, or we've talked about it in our previous conversations, where there's kind of what I call an awakening the above, which is awakening into the non-duality and into the heart and into divinity and into the beauty. And then there's awakening below, which is awakening of all the stuff we've been talking about, the darkness and the hidden corners of the underworld and so forth. But I talk about, so the model, if you can picture it, in the map or the picture in the book is, a picture of, the below, the middle, and the above. And it's like we start out our life in the middle. Most people we start out our lives in the middle, kind of the everyday, the world of work, and being a narrative self, and being this ordinary human in the ordinary world. And many of us, if you're not really open to the above or the below, you're just kind of like looking to establish yourself and achieve in the middle, which would be like getting a job and having a meaningful career and being a good person, and getting your political kind of mind screwed on straight, and what do you think about ethics, and what do you think about your impact on the planet, and so on and so forth, and then just kind of like ordinary human terms. And then you have an awakening into the above or into the below, and you're off, like you said, kind of like off in outer space, like having these like tremendous experiences and so forth. And you can become very alienated from the middle, especially when things first open up and you start really going out really far into the above or into the below. It can seem like that narrative self, that world of work and politics and society and culture and all that is just so far away and so meaningless and so insignificant. And it can be like that for a long time. But I think for me, the whole point in the end, the entire point in the end, is to integrate the
Same.
above and the below back into the middle, right? Back into the middle.
Yeah.
Like bringing all of the insights, the wisdom, the realizations that you've had as far out as you've gone into the above and the below, and integrating those back into the middle so that you have a fully integrated, you're a fully integrated being that not only, knows the ultimate truths of, whether it's the void or the love or the divinity or the soul or whatever, the ultimate truths that you've learned and have access to, but you also can just embody those as a completely ordinary person at work, with your family, in your community, in society, in the culture, right? And not being dissociated far out, in not staying dissociated far out into those.
I think that
realms.
dissociation is like such a common thing, and I think it's often put on a pedestal as well. Like it's considered to be a really exalted place.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
like I'm stepping into a role at the moment where I'm trying to speak more publicly about where I see that, like when I see people who are in that place, and just to talk openly about it and be like, okay, I think this is where this person's at, but there's other things, and I think there's some really major spiritual teachers, either in the present time or throughout history, who have really been in some of those places and probably, really authentically been in those places. Obviously not always, because there's lots of people who, kind of imitate somebody who is in one of those places. But just realizing that isn't the end of the story, and it's not necessarily healthy to be in that place. Like I'm thinking of, when someone is like so above everything.
Yeah.
And they can have this kind of arrogant energy about them where it's sort of quite demeaning to the ordinary human level. Sort of like, well, why would you suffer? Why don't you just choose to be above all of these things, you know?
Yeah.
And I get that because like I spent a short period of time in that place myself. Like to me, that's like the witness consciousness. And I remember, I don't know if I ever told you this story, like when I went to watch 12 Years a Slave with my housemate. Yeah, did I tell you about that?
Well, but tell others about it. They may not.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've spoken about it publicly, but I'll share it again now because it illustrates the point. But like I was really in this witness consciousness and it was pretty solid, you know? Like for people who don't know what the witness consciousness is, for me, that's just like, I'm behind my body. I am this spacious awareness that's just watching everything that's happening, much like being in a cinema and just watching what's on the screen. Very detached, very peaceful in a kind of neutral kind of a way. But I was in that state of consciousness, and I went to watch a movie, 12 Years a Slave, with a friend of mine. And if you've ever seen that movie, you know that's a really harrowing, like emotionally evocative movie. And I was watching it, and like obviously normally when you go watch a movie, you're meant to become engrossed in the film, right? Like you step into that story world. But for me, I was sat in the cinema and I never for one moment thought that I wasn't in a cinema. Like I knew I'm just sat in a cinema watching a screen. Like I didn't step into it and was just completely emotionally detached throughout the whole thing. And I remember looking around at my friend and she was crying. And I remember just thinking like, how weird that why is she doing that? Like it didn't make any sense to me. And I walked out of the cinema partly with like a sense of arrogance of like, oh, I am unaffected by these things. And it's weird that people are. But also there was a part within me that was kind of like, that isn't healthy. That's how I'm seeing things. And maybe a few days after that, I had a conversation with my mum where again, I felt nothing. And I remember hanging up the phone and just being like, this isn't the right way. And that's when everything dropped in. And I started having heart awakenings quite soon after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the flavors of the above, right? Actually, we have an expression in English, you were above it all, right? Which I think captures, the above. The above, one of the flavors of the above is detachment, right? And so, that's the witness or the I am awareness, and you're just sort of like, detached from everything that's happening. And another flavor of the above is, oh, I can see how all of this is just, God, or the goddess or the divine, sort of divine play of the universe happening. And so, it's all good. It's all perfect. It's all just the way it's supposed to be, right? That's another experience you could have had sitting in the movie. You see the suffering of slavery, you see the suffering of the people on the screen, you enter into it, but it's that, all of that is just perfect expression of divinity. Even pain and suffering is also part of this divine whole, right? That's another kind of experience you could have had in the above that could, have also had this form of detachment or this form of dissociation from the humanity of the experience. I think in the below, you could also have had a different kind of experience in the movie theater, where in the below you enter down into the suffering, and so you could have had the experience where you're watching the movie and suddenly you're immersed in the pain and the intergenerational trauma of slavery, and overwhelmed by the pain and suffering of the earth and the generations of humans that have gone through this, and you're just really kind of like swimming in the suffering and the shadow of that. right?
Sure.
And that would be another kind of experience you could have had in the theater where you're so deeply immersed in it, right? In the opposite direction that you're like way down in the below.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's the middle, which is, you know, it is a story, it's evoking emotions. I'm here with my friend, right? And or I'm here talking with my mother, and there's a relational kind of, you know, human sort of dynamic to it. So there's all of these different, you know, above, middle, and below kinds of experiences you could have had in the movie theater. Um, and maybe, you know, most of the people in the movie theater are just in the middle, right? They're
Yeah.
just in the emotional and the personal and the personal and interpersonal. That's like the majority of people. And then somebody who's had an awakening to the above or had an awakening to the below is having this like totally deep, immersive kind of experience, or this totally detached kind of experience. And they're thinking they're so much better than everybody else in the theater, right? Because they're having this different perspective, right?
Yeah, that
Uh,
special one.
yeah, and so I guess the model, you know, the map that's in my book, and what I'm really advocating is the integration of all of those. Like you can see that, you know, you can see the truth that all of this is unfolding within the field of awareness. You can see the truth that all of this is perfect and divine. You can see the truth that there's a whole kind of shadow of slavery that's been and the suffering associated with that that's still playing out and still is a wound
Yeah.
on the earth and on humanity. But you can also be there as a human being with your friend and just kind of like understanding this in the through the lens of the everyday. And then you step out of the theater and you're like, you know, how is this, how am I able to um integrate all of these perspectives and play them out in this world, right? In this social sphere. You know, what does this mean for me ethically, politically, you know, in how I live my life, and
Yeah.
what changes, you know, might I need to make? Like what kind of new perspectives does this movie give me that now maybe change how I think about politics, or how I think about, you know, what I do for my job, or what kinds of friends I have, or whatever, right? So I'm talking about like integrating all of those levels
Yeah.
in so that you're not stuck in any one of them, but being able to see simultaneously through all of those different perspectives.
I think that,
That's what the book's about. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that process like links into what some elements of what your book's about. And like I'm thinking of the Dark Night of the Soul, and like I'm just looking at my own life and how I moved through these different states and kind of went through these like textbook spiritual awakenings, like witness consciousness, unity consciousness. But then like I I wasn't in the right place in my life. So it's like this huge course correct needed to happen, like for me to be shifted um into the right place, and also like in many ways from for me to be sculpted, you know, like changed as a human being and in my psyche, so that I could be mature enough as a human being to do the work that I've come here to do. Like that's kind of how I see it. Like I feel like I was born to do the work that I'm doing now. Um, and it's almost like the beings that I'm connected to are looking at me like this kind of piece of clay or something, and wanting to shape me so that I'm what I'm supposed to be. But then that process, like for me, took years and years. It must have been about 8, 9, 10 years to for that course correct to happen. And some of that was brutal, like just horrible times, which I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I know that people do go through that in order to become kind of who they're supposed to be. But somewhere along the way with all of that, without me intending this, those threads wove together so that I don't even know when it happened, but at some point it's just like emptiness and unity being the same thing, like, and that making complete sense. And actually, when people were talking about separating them out, I kind of lose the ability to follow the conversation. It stops making sense to me. But it's not like I was trying to create that understanding. It just happened.
Yeah.
And I think it just crept up on me over time. And something similar with like the more underworld, the below dimensions of things, of that becoming very ordinary. So I've thrown a lot of stuff out there, but I think these are like important things to be talking about, which probably aren't spoken about that much. Like I don't think I really came across many books that were talking about integration. I think it was mostly there's this ideal state of being that you need to put all your heart and soul into trying to find. And once you get that, you'll be happy, and what I found was by that never really happened. It was much more about letting go even of that goal and that desire, and just living my life and accepting that my life is almost like, for me, it's almost like the cross that I'm on, if to use something of like a Jesus analogy. It's like my life is like this crucifix that allows me to transform, but it does so naturally. I don't need to make it do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're both talking about integration, right? We're talking about how these perspectives that seem so different and can be experienced in extreme ways during an awakening process, as time goes on, become more and more normal, more and more integrated together, more and more just part of daily life, part of ordinary way of being. And when you were talking, I was thinking about, there's a real kind of tension, I think, between having these experiences in deep ways that fundamentally transform you versus integrating them. And what I'm thinking is that if when you're having a kind of a, awakening, kind of a deepening into, like the witness consciousness, let's say, there's a pull, there's a fascination, there's like a magnetism or something that's like pulling you into that. And for me, there was always like an equal and opposite pull back towards the middle, because I had a family and I had young children when this was happening. And I just knew that I was not going to check out of being there for them.
Yes.
Being present, being actually present. And so even when in some deep experience, I could see that my relationship with my children was just an energy that was arising, and that their pain was just perfect part of the universe, right?
Yeah.
I could see that, but I also simultaneously was like, yes, and I still am going to fully embody this role as a human parent who loves this kid and is going to do everything to try to help them, to not suffer, right? So it was like I had these two equal and opposite poles constantly in play. And so for me, the process was like every time I went out to some deep place, during my practice, as soon as I sat down for family dinner, I might have been in complete, dissociated, emptiness, or in complete, like, underworld kind of, whatever. 15 minutes later, I'm sitting with my kids at dinner time, and I'm like, tell me about your day. And I'm really actually trying to fully be there and fully be present and fully, listen and feel, in this very human kind of relationship. And so for me, I would say those relationships and those responsibilities and just kind of the daily routines of cooking and washing dishes and talking to my kids, like that stuff is what kept me grounded and kept me like constantly integrating every day, as opposed to like checking out for 2 years and then realizing I had to integrate, right? There was like a constant push and pull of integration
Yeah.
on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's an interesting difference between us. And I think what you described, actually, I guess what both of us have described are pretty common ways that it can happen.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, family is that way.
Yeah, I mean, you were young and single and didn't have those, and you didn't, you had a job, I guess, but you let that
I mean,
go.
I didn't
You had
for 2.5 years. I didn't have a job. Like I was literally just trying to get through this thing.
Yeah.
And eventually,
and that's the way a lot of people go through this. Is just like that, right?
And like there's pros and cons to like the kind of spiritual traditions of the world. In that, like, if I could have been taken into a monastery and kind of looked after, and I did actually spend like a couple of months in a monastery, and it was great, like, because I could actually talk about what was happening to me, knowing that people are generally going to accept what I'm saying, like not going to think that I'm crazy or anything. If anything, it was too far the other way, because if I did share about what was going on, I could feel people kind of putting me up on a pedestal. I could feel like, my ego being like, oh, great. Yeah, now I'm someone who's important. So it was kind of, in a sense, it was too far the other way. But those settings obviously can be really helpful for people when they're awakening, but also just being a father and being with their family can be like that. Like, and there's loads of notable examples of people who've gone through spiritual awakenings who have remained very active in their families.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll find debates, right, between those two different, I don't know, camps, right, where the people who go the monastic route will say, oh, well, you lay people can't go as deep as we can into into the outer realms of this, that, or the other, right? And then the people that are in lay life will say, well, yeah, but you guys are, disconnected from the society and so on and so forth. And there's whose path is better.
No. Yeah,
debated. But I guess my model is coming in on the side of integrating into ordinary lay life, right? So like when I talk about integration into the middle, this is a model for people who are not going to become monastics and check out of society. And if that's the choice you're making, right? If that's the path that you're on, is this path of staying within the human realm and staying within the lay life and not doing this kind of like, not going and living in a cave in Tibet for the next 30 years, right? You're staying in the lay life. My advice would be to get different role models. Because if you're living in lay life and you're not going to go live in a cave in Tibet for 30 years, then why is your role model, Ramana Maharshi, who essentially went and lived in a cave, right? Why would your role model be somebody who's not living the life that you are living, right?
I still feel like this, like there's this part of me that views certain teachers as more evolved. Like I'm getting more to grips with that part of myself and like slowly letting it go. But I can see there's this part of me that still puts me under pressure to be more like that, because I see it as more advanced. Yeah. And it's like, it's frustrating because of what you're just saying there, where it's like, well, those aren't my role models. That's not who I'm supposed to be. Like, I have such a thing with Eckhart Tolle about it. I've spoken to you about it before. And it's like, I think it's because he was the person that I watched to trigger my awakening. And like, because I've spent so much time thinking about this, because because of the internal pressure. And what I've eventually come up with is like this idea that he's had an air awakening. I can't remember if I've spoken to you about this before, but like,
no.
So like that he's had an air awakening. I remember I looked at his astrology chart once and found out that he's an Aquarius, which is like the most detached air sign. And I was like, oh, of course he would be a detached air sign. He's a detached air awakening person. Like that's what he's had. And then realizing that isn't what I've had. It's like I'm like earth awakening. I've gone down. And then like trying to understand these differences and articulate it in such a way where it's like it stops being this kind of me versus them thing, which I think is like part of what we've been talking about there. Like who's the best? Who's like the right one? Well, the right one is the one you're most aligned with. Like, and that's what you're saying there with role models. It's like, well, if I'm an earth awakening person, why would I look to an air awakening teacher? Like all that's going to do is create frustration for me.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. I never have really, I did have a brief little phase, like when in my 20s when I was into astrology. So but I haven't ever thought about, awakening in terms of astrology. I'm a Virgo. So also,
I wondered, I was going to ask you.
Yeah. So maybe that's also like, affecting my ideas about this, and aligning me more with the Earth awakening. But the thought I have is just, for me, the ideal that you hold in your head for what awakening looks like can be super inspirational, especially starting out. It can point you out of kind of the prison of the middle, right? Being imprisoned in any perspective is a problem. Being imprisoned in the middle, where most of us start out, before our awakening, is definitely, a source of suffering. And so these role models, you can be really, fascinated by them. Oh, wow, they're so deep and so, peaceful and so I don't know what, in tune and present, and and that can be really inspirational. But yeah, it kind of aiming towards somebody else's awakening is of itself just, from the beginning, a mistake. It's a problem. You're trying to live somebody else's life and somebody else's truth and somebody else's reality instead of discovering your own, right? For me, it's far more about awakening, is far more about discovering who am I really, and how am I going to best integrate, all of these truths that I see along the way into my own destiny, into my own soul, into my own life, right? Whatever that looks like. And if you're a musician, you're a teacher, you're a business person, you're a parent, you're whatever your dharma is on this earth, whatever your roles are, how does this integrate? How does all of this integrate into who you are and what your skills are, and what gifts you have to bring to the world? And maybe your gifts are that you're going to live in a cave for 30 years and really explore the heck out of, some deep spiritual states. Maybe that is your gift to the world and your abilities, and then you should go do that. But for most of us, that's not what we're going to wind up doing. So we shouldn't be kicking ourselves and beating ourselves up for not fulfilling that role.
Yeah. Oh man, like there must be so much unnecessary suffering that comes about as a result of this, because I think what happens sometimes is a teacher will have a very clear awakening in a specific direction and then say that is what awakening is.
Yeah.
And then the students will come along and hear that and just assume that that person's being correct in what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then try and mold themselves to it.
Yeah.
And and sometimes that can become quite extreme. Like if the teacher is advocating that that person give up their work, career, and family and come and stay with them because this is the only thing that's truly important.
Yeah.
There can be a life-destroying decision process, and completely unnecessary and irrelevant, actually, to their spiritual awakening.
Yeah, and then we have whole religions built up around that. I mean, I don't, I'm not here to criticize religions per se, but we have, the monastic model in Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity. A lot of other religions have this kind of monastic model where it's, your spiritual leaders are the people who have checked out of the middle, right? And those are the people who have the authority to speak about what true and false spirituality really are. So you're going to have, religions or traditions that are just built up around this hierarchy where it's like, if you're not a monastic, you don't, your experience is devalued, and your spiritual, awakening is bullshit, because it doesn't match our, monastic model.
Yes.
And I just think people, we live in the 21st century now where we can choose whether or not to buy into that kind of ideology, and we can choose whether or not we want to subscribe to that kind of tradition. So if that makes sense for you and you feel yourself drawn towards that kind of model, then great, but I'm not.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes some figuring out, right? That you can kind of go back and forth between these different places, and sometimes trying one of these things on is necessary so that you realize that it actually doesn't fit you.
Yeah. Yeah. I did that. Like you, I spent a little bit of time in a monastic setting for, just kind of trying it on, and realized it was not a good fit.
How long were you there?
Well, a couple months. I was there for a summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you fully ordain, or were you just kind of staying in a monastery?
No, I was a lay person staying in a monastic setting.
Okay, I think I'm sensitive.
But fully adopted the lifestyle, right, of the place, but not making the commitment.
Yeah, sure.
What about you? Did you just went on the same kind of thing, or were you?
Yeah, I mean, so I was talking to Fran at the time, and so I had me and Fran had connected and we'd spoken a few times, and then I had the big Kundalini awakening, and I told Fran about it, and she basically was just like, that's not a big deal, and just kind of really put it down. And I think that was probably coming from her monastic formation, where they're very much don't do anything that can fuel the ego of the student. And I was very excited about this thing that had happened. And she was kind of quite almost cold about it. And it really triggered me, and I got really annoyed about it. And then I was just like, she doesn't know what she's talking about, blah, 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 blah. And I just pushed her away, basically. And it wasn't for another a year or two. And then I went into the dark night of the soul, and I was like, I really need some help. And I reached out to her again, and we reconnected. But she was like, you should be in therapy. It was one of the first things she said when we reconnected. And I was like, this person who had a lot of childhood trauma, who I thought, I'm going to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and I'm going to fix other people who have trauma, very much projecting it out onto other people without realizing that I'm just as hurt as these people that I'm, trying to fix. I think it's quite a classic thing that a lot of people do. Anyway, so I really reluctant to go into therapy, and she told me that I needed therapy, and it was this real punch in the gut, but I did go. And the other thing that she said that I needed was to spend time with other people who are meditating and be part of a spiritual community. So I found a Buddhist group that was nearby, and ended up staying at their like main monastery for a couple of months. Just like it was quite a nice setup. Like I just had to do like a few hours work a day, like in their cafe or stuff or something, and then everything is free. So all my accommodation was free, all my meals were free, and I just stayed there and I met lots of people, and it was very nice. Turned out that this particular Buddhist group is a bit culty. I found out afterwards. And that did make sense because the people who were more involved in it did have like a bit of an off vibe, especially the monastics. They also didn't allow any books except for the person who was like the head of their tradition. You know, there were lots of warning signs, but it was still a nice place for me to be at the time.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning that I really like Fran's advice to get therapy because that's, I think, what we're talking about, the above, the middle, and the below. And as people, shoot off into the above, it's like all the problems can be solved by the above, right? Like, so I'm like deep into non-duality, and if anything comes up that's traumatic or some kind of bad memory or something like that, then the thing to do must be to hold it in my witness consciousness, or in my hold it in awareness, and it'll dissolve, right? Or if I'm deep into like love and divinity and so forth, then I'll just surrender this to God and everything will be fine. Or if I'm way down in the below, it's like, oh, the only way to deal with this is to like go down into the underworld and retrieve lost pieces of my soul that might be that need some kind of whatever, and so we can become very fixated in these practices, or in these interpretations of where we are, and kind of lose track of the others. And if you're more integrated, right, then there's no reason to exclude the knowledge and the wisdom and the healing that comes from taking perspectives from other places, right? So if you're fully integrated, you can hold the above, the below, and the middle all simultaneously, and bring them all to bear on an issue, right? So if you're experiencing some trauma, maybe surrender to God and hold it in awareness and go retrieve pieces of your soul, but also maybe just some good old fashioned normal middle realm human techniques, like the talk therapy, EMDR, maybe medication, maybe paying attention to your body, maybe paying attention to your diet, maybe it's gut microbiome or something, something very kind of like physical,
very ordinary causing,
very ordinary
stress.
and there's so it's another way that you can become so dissociated from the middle, or dissociated one perspective can become more predominant and become your whole world, and you just shut out all the other possibilities. So I think I like Fran's kind of advice to sort of do both, go spiritual community and get therapy, right? And why not add a couple more perspectives in there too, and you can kind of address something in a more holistic and integrated way.
She took me she could see like that I was very dissociated and troubled, and I remember her saying to me, like, don't meditate, which, like, I think for a lot of people would sound like strange advice to come from a meditation teacher, like, a spiritual teacher who spent so many years meditating. But sometimes meditation is going to make it worse.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And Fran had this lovely way of talking about things. Like, she would say, like, a spiritual teacher is like a doctor, and a doctor shouldn't just prescribe antibiotics to every patient. But unfortunately, that's what a lot of spiritual teachers do. They will just give the same medicine to every single person.
Yeah.
And like sometimes that's going to work because it will just happen to be what they need. But if they were more skillful, they'd be able to provide different medicines,
Yeah. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like metaphors, and that's a good one. Yeah.
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 Well, time's running out, but is there anything else that you want to throw in about just kind of daily life stuff? I'm really glad that we're having these conversations because I just feel like there's just some real missing pieces, like in the general conversation, and to my mind, I think for both of us, we've been through a lot of things that have been quite unusual and surprising. That don't really get spoken about. And I'm like, there must be other people out there who are going through these things and they might be quite confused. And just having people like us talk about it in just an ordinary way as well. Like, it doesn't have to have like, crazy out there flowery language and stuff. Like, we can just talk about it like regular people and just be like, these are things that can happen. And it does kind of play itself out eventually. It's funny, just like thinking back to myself 10 years ago, going through the dark night of the soul. I remember my guides talking to me and they were like, I was just in so much despair. Like, it was so intense. And then they were just like, everything's going to be fine. Like, you're just working through some stuff. Everything's going to be fine. And there's going to be a moment where you look back on this and see that it was all how it was meant to be. And that happened quite a while ago, that I was able to look back at it with that perspective, and I just say that for anyone out there who is in that place right now, because it does change.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just add a kind of a reflection that might be helpful. So I think one way of talking about this problem that we've been identifying and addressing here is that people can become very limited in their identity and their view of reality. So if I'm often, deep in non-dual awareness, it really can seem like, I am awareness and there is nothing that's not awareness and everything in the world is awareness. And when I'm deep into love or divinity, I am God and there is nothing but love, right? And if I'm deep into the underworld, there's there I am this soul, or I am this channeler of dragons, or I am, wherever the identity lands. And the whole world is this one perspective. I think if you find yourself there in any one view, really sort of fully immersed in that view, I think it would be helpful to really look and see if you aren't also just an ordinary human being. If you aren't also, is it completely impossible that the material world and just ordinary kind of human relationships and so forth are not also equally just as true? And sometimes it seems like they're not. Sometimes it will seem like that these two views are just completely incompatible because you're so far out into whatever experience you're having. But just constantly having that reflection, yes, it does seem that I am awareness right now, that there's nothing but awareness. But is it not possible that materiality is also true, that just ordinary human me is also true in some way? And that reflection, that constant reflection, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with that sort of what kept me anchored was the constant, pull back to just being an ordinary person with my kids. And so I'm
Yeah.
trying to provide like a, even if you don't have kids, you don't have a job, you don't have those, that kind of anchor that's naturally doing that for you. You can create your own anchor in that way by just reflecting this way. And just try to see like, try to see things continuously in a more integrated way rather than just one viewpoint.
Yeah. And therapy probably helps quite a lot as well. And I'm just sort of thinking about, why do people move so far away from the everyday? And my belief is that a lot of it is because the everyday is messy and painful.
Yeah.
And that having a therapist who can kind of pull you gently back into that stuff and tease some of it out. And then, like, I work with a lot of people who like kind of come from that like ascension place, or more of like a metaphysical, like like the ideas of star seeds and that kind of thing, like feeling like they're not of this planet and they're from another place and they want to go home. And to kind of help people like that to come into their bodies and accept that like this world and this body that they're in can be their home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you don't have to live in this tension of kind of needing to move away from the house, that you're in.
Yeah. 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 So like if spirituality is going to help at all with alleviating suffering, it's not going to happen because spirituality gives you a vehicle to escape from suffering. It's only going to happen because spirituality gives you some perspectives or some tools that you can then bring back into the world and into your body and heal the suffering and learn how to live with the suffering, right? And to transform the suffering that's here. That's the only way that spirituality is ultimately going to help at all. It's not about escape.
Man, yeah. I like, that was my plan for so long. Like the first few years, it was like, oh great, I found the way to escape.
Yeah, yeah.
And then really at that part, it was the dark night of the soul, but it was also a relationship. Actually, I remember being like, had this image of Kali on my wall, and I was in loads of emotional pain. And I was like, what's going on? I remember looking to that image and being like, Kali, please help me. And then shortly after that, I met my ex, who had, her name sounded quite a lot like Kali, and she kind of snapped me out. She was like a bit of a bubble burster person, and like snapped me out of my, kind of floaty spiritual bubble, and brought me back down to earth. Was quite a rude awakening. And for me, a lot of that was like tapping into my anger. It was like getting it in touch with like raw emotions. And that kind of...
Oh, Jack, but spiritual people don't have anger. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. Oh man, like that's definitely still a thing. Like I remember Fran once, someone asked her, like, because they knew that she was good friends with Adyashanti, and obviously Adyashanti is like kind of looked up to in the non-dual world. And this woman was talking to Fran, and she was like, "Does when you next see Adyashanti, can you ask him if he ever experiences anger?" And she was like, "Okay, I'm pretty sure he does, but yeah, fine." And then she did mention it to him, and he was like, "Tell her that her question made me angry."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, anger is just it's a natural reaction of the human body and a human mind, right? It's a natural reaction that arises when your boundaries are crossed.
Yeah, and there's a healthy element to that.
Yeah.
Like I see it as the element of fire. And like if you lose that, you never express that and you suppress it all the time, you will lose your sense of personal identity and like potentially become just kind of shaped by external forces. Like, and you lose yourself on a personal level, I think.
Yeah, which is the goal for many spiritual.
To lose yourself on a personal level.
Yeah. So Um, yeah, but if you're going to be in the world, if you're going to be an integrated person and not be living in a cave in Tibet somewhere, right? You're going to experience your boundaries being crossed. You're going to experience anger arising when that happens, right? It arises in the body. It's not a problem. There's no, I mean, what would be the problem is allowing that anger to like rule you and dictate your behavior and manipulate you and monopolize you and sort of following it and carrying it and being shaped by it, right? That's the problem. But anger arising in the body, kind of burning its way through and disappearing after a couple minutes because you're not really sort of like fueling it. I don't think there's anything at all wrong with that. It's just natural part of being a human being, right?
For sure. Like the kind of historical figure I always go back to for that is Jesus, and it's him throwing the moneylenders out of the temple. It's like that's quite an extreme expression of fiery anger. Like he's literally flipping over tables.
Yeah.
Like maybe he went too far, but like that this guy is like such a pedestaled person of like the kind of spiritual perfection, and the fact that he actually experienced emotion quite frequently, and that's just in like the reports, like these thousands of year old reports that were written 450 years after he died or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I look at my dogs. The two, they get along great. Presumably they love each other. They're kind of like, brothers. They hang out together all the time. Every once in a while, one of them kind of like crosses a boundary of some kind, and one of them snaps at the other like,
mm-hmm.
And it's over and done with in like 3 seconds. The next minute, they're like, wagging their tails and wanting a cookie or whatever. Right. So, I mean, it's just an illustration of anger arising naturally in the natural world. I don't think anybody is going to accuse dogs of, not being enlightened and needing to, go meditate on something, right? To go meditate in the cave for 30 years to solve their anger problems, right? Like it's just a natural happening that arises, and 30 seconds later it's gone and everything's, back to normal. And that's I think, the way of integration, right? Just the human can be here too. The natural can be here too. The body can be here too. It can all be here, just kind of unfolding spontaneously.
I had it yesterday.
No problem.
Me and Lola had some arguments like yesterday and a little bit the day before, and like I'm someone who like would never allow myself to be angry with someone that I was in a relationship with. But then what that would become would be me suppressing my anger,
resentment,
and just sort of becoming cold and distant. And I noticed that's how I was feeling with her yesterday. Like I could see myself kind of pulling away, and instead of going into that old pattern, I just told her like how I was feeling, and then we did have an argument, but then we got through that, and then came back together again, and then are closer than we were before. And I think it's sad that some forms of spirituality encourage people to not do that, like as if that's something bad. And it's like, no, like that venting can be a part of a healthy process. It's far more, human life is far more nuanced than just kind of anger is bad. Well, thank you so much. It's been a very fruitful conversation.
Yeah. What do we know? We've obviously just shown how how unenlightened and
No, people, no one's going to tune in now.
and ignorant we are. But yeah, yeah.
I think that this is the new style of spiritual teaching, in my opinion. Just honesty, grounded honesty, just in our humanity. And I see that a lot in the way that people respond. That when I'm kind of just really real, which obviously includes all of the fragility of being human, without being kind of completely bogged down in it. I think that's when people resonate the most. And I think it's refreshing for a lot of people, because I personally, I see it as a bit of a missing piece in the way that spirituality is taught. And I'm glad that we're doing this.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful to you for making the space and the platform to be able to have these kinds of conversations. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny thinking back to where we met and like, look at us now. I think we've both changed a lot, actually, in a short space of time. It's quite amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's listening. And we'll be back with another episode soon.
See you next time.